Hi everyone, here's the Bookchemist once again, and it's time to begin my rereading of Gravity's Rainbow. And let me say once again that I'm really happy so many of you were so excited about this idea and decided to read along with me and to reread or read the book for the first time. I'm really happy about it. I can't wait to begin discussing the novel. And if a month ago, when I started thinking about this whole project thing, I was very scared about rereading a book that when I read it the first time, I liked it so much, but at the same time it moved me and disturbed me so intensely. Now I'm truly looking forward to the experience, and I'm positive Gravity's Rainbow will make me go back to scared very fast. This is just an introductory video, hopefully it will be very short. I'm going to give you some context, just a little context. I'm going to mention some supporting material you may wish to check out if you're struggling with your reading, and I'm also going to mention a few secondary sources you may wish to read, to look for if this is your second or further reread of the novel, or if later on you feel like going deeper into the experience. I usually prefer to approach my novels knowing as little about them and about their authors as possible in order to appreciate them without any kind of preconception. The only thing I'm going to mention about context is that this book was published in 1973. It is very much a book of its time. It is a historical novel set in the last months of World War II, but you know, when it comes to historical fiction, there's this truism that says that historical fiction is somehow impossible, because no matter what time period you are discussing in your novel or short story or whatever, you're always only talking about your own time, because your own time, your contemporary reality is all you can access, which is one of those things that is so true it's basically useless. Anyway, of course, there's a big truth behind that statement, and Gravity's Rainbow is very much steeped in 1960s thought and politics, in this decade of political struggle, this decade of social rights movements, of the student movements in the US and in Europe and across the world, in this decade of opposition to the Vietnam War, the decade of the counterculture. And you will notice that extensively, this opposition between an oppressive order and spontaneous forms of opposition to it, of spontaneous forms of reaction and resistance to it. You will notice it definitely in the course of the novel. And since I mentioned that this is a historical novel, also be prepared for quite a few anachronisms, which are elements that jar with the historical context, or that are not, should not have a place in this type of setting. Personally, I love Pynchon's anachronisms. I do believe that his historical novels are terrific in the way they are researched. If anything, at times it becomes too difficult to follow these novels because they are so specific when it comes to several details of their setting and context. But at the same time, I love the way he plays with this historical setting, and he inserts stuff from later moments in history, because for lots of narrative and creative reasons, not last among those the idea I mentioned at the beginning, that you're always writing historical fiction from a later moment in history. Your historical fiction is always going to be wrong. It's always going to be imperfect. You'll never be able to recreate perfectly a historical moment in time. And those anachronisms, in my opinion, they signal that. They always make you remember that's the case. They always keep to the foreground of the novel the fact that this is a recreation of a past moment in history, and that both immersing yourself in that historical moment and remembering that it's projected from a later moment in history, those are both important during the reading experience. Hopefully we'll be able to discuss this further as we read the novel, and also we'll be able to contextualize Gravity's Rainbow within the field of literary postmodernism, this current, which is still highly debated, but that has in Gravity's Rainbow very much its key expression. It is usually considered the masterpiece of high postmodernism, a bit like Ulysses is usually seen as the masterpiece of high modernism. We'll discuss what that is all about, why critics find Gravity's Rainbow to be a key example of postmodernism, of different views of postmodernism, because that's of course a highly debated movement or current or whatever. When it comes to inserting Gravity's Rainbow in Pynchon's canon in his bibliography, I always think back to Richard Locke's review of the novel for the New York Times when it came out in 1973. He said that the book could as well have been called V2, which is kind of uncanny considering how, of course, the V2 rocket, the German V2 missile, plays such an important role in the novel. It's why it's on most covers, on the cover of most editions of Gravity's Rainbow, because this feels very much like a sequel, let's call it a spiritual sequel to Pynchon's debut novel V. It carries forward so many of its themes, so many of its reflections. It carries forward its broader reflection on the collapse and entropic disintegration of Western civilization as symbolized through this thirst for war and this apocalyptic longing. The Crying of Lot 49, which came out between these two novels and which Pynchon later sort of said it was a bit of a mistake, at least in Introduction to Slow Learner. He said that he is not the biggest fan of Lot 49. It does feel a little bit different, as its size suggests. Its scope is different. It deals with different themes up to a point, even though Pynchon's concerns are of course always present. But Gravity's Rainbow and V are very much brothers, and also in the way they are difficult and cryptic and very obscure and very upsetting at times. They are different, in my opinion, from the rest of Pynchon's bibliography. Pynchon's novels from Mason and Dixon onward have a much more balanced outlook on history, and which doesn't mean that they are happy-go-lucky novels, that the message of those ones is everything is fine. Of course, Pynchon always deals with some of the most terrible and dreadful and disturbing shit in history, but Mason and Dixon, Against the Day, Bleeding Edge, while they tackle such disturbing topics, also offer so many uplifting moments and so many enlightening characters and reflections. Which is not necessarily to say that Gravity's Rainbow is without hope. We'll see about that as we read along. But still, that's the reason, by the way. Oh, I forgot about Vineland. Vineland, in my opinion, is a bit of a transitional novel between the first stage in Pynchon's oeuvre and the second part of his career. Many people put it together with Mason and Dixon and the later novels, probably because, chronologically speaking, it is so much closer to Mason and Dixon than to Gravity's Rainbow. But to me, that novel is a bit peculiar and shares elements of both phases of his career. That's the reason what I wanted to mention is why I do believe that Pynchon's career can be approached from any point of entry. And once you've read Gravity's Rainbow, you can either read V, this brother novel, or you can decide to go with Against the Day or Inherent Vice or Bleeding Edge, or to change perspective completely. And if you don't like Gravity's Rainbow, if you're struggling with this, do not give up on Pynchon entirely. At the very least, try Inherent Vice, because I'm positive so many people are going to love that novel. It's so amazing. It's genius, but it's also highly enjoyable, whereas Gravity's Rainbow, highly enjoyable, probably I wouldn't call it that. Last bit of context I want to mention, just to show you how divisive a novel Gravity's Rainbow is the amount of prizes it won. The key prize it won was the National Book Award in 1974, I think. It didn't win the Pulitzer Prize, but something weird happened. The judging committee was unanimous, they all wanted to give it the prize, but the broader committee somehow found the book immoral and turgid, whatever that means, so they decided not to award any Pulitzer Prize that year. That should give you a sense of how different people will react very differently to Gravity's Rainbow. And once more, just to make it sure, it's not, in my opinion, it's not a matter of some people are not good enough readers for the book. It's just that it's not a book for everyone. Also, there's going to be a lot of links to all the things things I mention in this video in the description box. One of these links is going to point on an article by Jonathan Lethem where he points at the fact that Gravity's Rainbow did not win the Nebula Award in 1973 as the moment where science fiction lost its chance to evolve into something further. Because Gravity's Rainbow, besides being a historical novel and so many other things, a high postmodernist novel, it is science fiction 100%, and it was nominated for a Nebula Award. It didn't win. Do read Lethem's article because it's a great article. Lethem is a genius essay writer, and his position, as I just summarized it, sounds very controversial, and it is up to a point, though not necessarily so much, and it is very, very well argued. Moving on, supporting material. Gravity's Rainbow, very difficult. Luckily for you, you're going to have several websites and sources you can consult during the reading if you're having trouble with the book. All I want to say is having trouble with Pynchon, not really realizing what's going on 100% of the time, struggling with certain passages, struggling with certain technical themes. That's part of the experience. Do not be surprised if sometimes you're once again puzzled, if sometimes you're confused, if you're not certain about exactly the specifics of the ballistics of rocket launching and such stuff. But if you are having trouble with some of the obscure passages of the novel, what you can consult first and foremost is the Pynchon Wiki about Gravity's Rainbow, which is very detailed. It's a great source. Of course, take it with a pinch of salt, as with everything. That's just some other reader's contribution to a general interpretation of the novel, but it can definitely help decode some obscure passages. Once again, do not overuse it. I think if it's your first reading, my main suggestion is just read the novel, only use the Pynchon Wiki. If you're really confused about a specific passage and want to learn more about it, don't overdose on the Pynchon Wiki and don't spend more time on that than on Gravity's Rainbow, is what I want to suggest. The same goes with Steven Weisenburger's A Gravity's Rainbow Companion, a priceless text, and I would absolutely recommend it if it's your especially if it's your second read or if it's a reread. I would recommend keeping a copy close to you. You can consult when you're confused about a specific passage or when you have doubts about a certain sentence or whatnot. Finally, the Pynchon in Public podcast is also great stuff. They basically did what I'm trying to do at the moment, reading together Pynchon's novels. They did Gravity's Rainbow some time ago, and their podcast, in their podcast they discussed the novel. They filmed several episodes for each part of the novel. You can find all of them on their website. There's links in the description box, and their discussion is very interesting, very enlightening. Their different perspectives shed a lot of light on the most obscure passages of the novel. It's great stuff if you want to go deeper into the novel. Pynchon Wiki, Pynchon in Public, that stuff's free online. When it comes to Weisenburger's companion to Gravity's Rainbow, as an academic text, it's not going to be cheap. My main first and foremost, do not believe you need to have that book close by to understand the novel. Far from it, absolutely. If you feel like reading it, check out local libraries, especially if you have a university or a college close to you. It's highly likely they'll have it in their library. If you are a college student, it's even possible you will be granted online access to it through websites such as ProQuest. Look into that possibility. But even if you're not a student, it's likely you may be able to find it at a library not too far from you. Otherwise, if you really feel like reading that, you'll probably have to fork out around £20, I suppose, $25, something like that. The same goes for the secondary sources I'm going to mention now. I'm not so much has been written on Gravity's Rainbow since it came out. I'm only going to mention a few sources. Probably the two key books I want to mention are David Cowart's Thomas Pynchon and the Dark Passages of History, and Weisenburger and Herman's Gravity's Rainbow, Domination and Freedom. The latter is a book that explores what I mentioned at the beginning of the video, which is Gravity's Rainbow as sort of a manifesto for the counterculture of the 60s. They explore the novel as steeped in its cultural context and as expressing so many of the thoughts and theories and philosophical, political theories of its time. It's very interesting, it's a very interesting read. It's probably the most famous monograph on Gravity's Rainbow ever published, especially interesting if you are into politics and philosophy and the relationship between that and the novel. David Cowart's Dark Passages of History, in my opinion, is hands down the best study on Pynchon ever published. It's a study of all his novels except except Bleeding Edge, because it came out before the novel was published. That's too bad. And Cowart is so enjoyable, he writes so well, he sheds so much light on Pynchon's whole bibliography, whole oeuvre. His takes are so cautious, is what I want to say. He never goes over the top, he never tries to draw a grand narrative from his reading of the novels, but at the same time they are so in-depth, they allow you to get so much more out of all these books. And his take on Gravity's Rainbow in particular is all the more valuable because the novel itself is so cryptic. Really, I can't recommend that book highly enough. If you are a Pynchon fan, if you read other of his novels, it's definitely worth checking that out. And it's the one book among these secondary sources I would recommend forking out £20 for to have it on your bookshelf forever. Finally, the Cambridge Companion to Thomas Pynchon. While valuable on so many fronts, it's a good collection, great collection of essays on Pynchon. I don't think you really need it in this context. You probably do need it if you are a Pynchon scholar or a huge Pynchon fan, but at this moment, for a reread of Gravity's Rainbow, I do not necessarily think that book is should be at the top of your priority list. It's time to reread Gravity's Rainbow. I will see you guys in 2 weeks on the 20th of September, where I will discuss through the comment section the first half of part 1, Beyond the Zero. In the description box below, I will post again the full schedule of this reading project, so that you'll know when the videos will come out, what part of the book I'll be discussing in each of these videos. The next video, the one on the 20th of September, I will still post it on the channel so that everyone can see it. I probably am going to post the others on my Patreon page, at least at first, but they are not going to be beyond any type of paywall. They're going to be accessible to anyone. I'm only going to post them there so I don't flood the channel with videos on Gravity's Rainbow. We'll see about that though. And thank you as always for watching. Let me know if there's any further secondary sources or supporting material that you think will be very useful to readers of Gravity's Rainbow, and I will see you in the next video. Bye guys.